I know. But I think 1 hour we'll be with each other for about an hour. I think that should be adequate.
Yes, yes. And how are you, Javed?
Hi, Naveed. Hi, Samya.
Very well, Nisar. Very well. Good to hear your voice. Yeah. Gee. So we are all ears now.
We welcome Naveen Sardana from India, New Delhi. And now
well.
we will start the meeting.
Hi, hi.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, as we start, once again, we will all
Hi,
go on mute. And except for Jack, who will not be on mute, let me introduce Jack. He's the Deputy U.S. Consul General in Karachi. Jack arrived in Karachi in October 2019 after serving for 4 years at the U.S. mission at NATO in Brussels. Previously, he was the Executive Secretary at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul from 2011 to 2012. And then at the U.S. Consulate, been posted in Consul General in Durban, South Africa, the U.S. Embassy in Libreville, originally from SMU and MPP from Georgetown University. Jack is married and has 4 teenage children. I know teenage children could be very difficult. So welcome, Jack. And
thank you.
Over to you, Jack. Now we will
thank you very much.
Mute.
Thank you. Thank you. I very much appreciate it. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to everyone tonight. And I am really impressed at how everybody got the setup. So I have my phone on the video in front of me, and then I have connected on my iPad where I can see all of you to my left and read chats and things like that. So it is our new normal. It is our new world. And this is one of the themes here tonight, is that we've all learned how to do this. So this is a new good skill for all of us. It is a tradition when one speaks to an organization to basically lay out your credentials. So you just heard my biography, but I think more importantly, I think I have to tell you that it's an honor for me to be speaking in, I believe this is my 5th country that I've been speaking to Rotary clubs. As you just heard, I lived in Libreville, Gabon, and I remember speaking to them there. I remember speaking to a Rotary club in Milan, Italy, in Italian. That was a real challenge for me. I spoke to Rotary in South Africa and in the US. So I'm glad to add Pakistan to my list. My grandfather was a Rotarian, and I have good memories of, as a child, going to the pancake breakfast at the Rotary Club in Webster Groves, Missouri. But more importantly, as I grew up, I gained an appreciation for all the service that Rotary does. And in the US, they have very important scholarships that I knew a lot of people that got. So thanks very much once again. You heard my bio, so you know that I am not an expert in anything, but I've been very fortunate enough to have lived in several different countries around the world and worked in different areas. And I've had a variety of experiences. As my father would say, that makes me just smart enough to be dangerous. But as a diplomat, of course, I can have an opinion on everything. So I'm more than happy to be talking about the new normal in the post-COVID world tonight. I'm less concerned than usual because in this case, there are no experts. I think everyone is literally just trying to guess and figure out what the new normal will be. So I consider this to be a conversation. I'll give you my thoughts, but I hope that we can have a conversation after that. To start off with, just a couple of thoughts. The first being that it's hard to really know what we're gonna have in the new normal when we're still in the middle of this. It's really difficult to discuss. It's almost like talking, I was thinking, it's like having a conversation about post-World War II in about 1943 or 1944. You wouldn't even know who was going to win the war, so how could you really know what was gonna come afterwards? And what really occurs to me is that I'm sure almost nobody imagined that the post-World War II world would be dominated by communism versus democracy, and we'd have 70 years of the Cold War. That wasn't even a thought in the middle of the war, but that's really what happened after it. So I think that's where we are right now. I think it's also useful at times like this to look back to history to see what lessons we can learn from previous pandemics. It's important to see how we reacted to those, but there's only so much we can learn because the world we're in today is so different from back then. Obviously, one of the differences between previous pandemics from the Middle Ages is that we actually understand what's making us sick. Back then, when you look at the Black Plague or the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages, they didn't even know what was making them sick. Even the Spanish flu in 1918, they didn't have germ theory. So they were making different decisions. And in theory, we can make decisions based on better information. Number two is the world is so much smaller than it was back then. Not only can people move around the globe with astonishing speed, but information is now virtually instantaneous. It amazes me that if a disaster strikes on the other side of the world, I guarantee you one of us is going to receive an instant message on our phones and to be made immediately aware of that. That's pretty incredible if you think about it. So there's really only so much we can draw from a world back then to what our experiences will be like today. So I'm obviously no medical expert, and I will try to strenuously avoid any discussion of the actual disease. I read the same reports you do, and I no doubt have no special knowledge. But I think there's a couple of things we can all agree concerning this disease, and that number one is this disease is more contagious than many of the others that we're already familiar with. There's certainly still a lot of information that we don't know about it, but we've heard of cases where people have been infected without really knowing it. And that means, I think, two things. People who aren't sick are capable of spreading the disease. And you can get infected even if you aren't directly in close contact with others. One example of this in our own world is that one of our senior officials at our embassy in Islamabad came down as COVID positive, even though he had followed all of the SOPs and the precautions. We still don't actually know how that happened. But the fact that the contagiousness of this disease is so pervasive and unknown is one of the factors that makes it difficult. The second factor is that this disease is more deadly than other diseases that we've grown used to. So there's been some talk about how this is similar to the flu, but it definitely doesn't kill everybody that makes it sick. It definitely doesn't kill everybody who gets the disease. Estimates are that 80% of the people who get it either have no symptoms or that they have very few symptoms. It's very mild. But in the end, it's clearly more dangerous than the flu. So when all of the data is in and all the science is going to be analyzed, they'll know that more people will die of COVID who get it than the people who get the flu will die. So these are two things that we understand and we can agree are true. But not really. Because one of the really interesting things about this current pandemic is that there is a constant battle over the question of what is true or what is real. And the information is what is a fact and what isn't a fact. And what's interesting to me as I looked into this is that it's the same thing that has happened in all previous pandemics and epidemics as well. Interestingly enough, I read that in the yellow fever epidemic in early American history in 1793 in Philadelphia, which of course yellow fever is carried by mosquitoes. Oops, hold on one second. Someone has a microphone on. Can you still hear me? I have an echo in my ears, make it difficult. Okay. In 1793 in a yellow fever epidemic, there was information that went around that said that Black slaves were immune to the disease. And because of that, even abolitionists, those who didn't believe in slavery, were calling to recruit Black people to come in to care for people who were sick at the time. I think to me, it really hits home that pandemics are stressful times and a lot of disinformation, bad information, and at the same time, maybe some bad helpful information or hopeful information can really lead to a question over what is true and what isn't true. And the fight between what is true and what is fake can end up being very messy, and at times it can turn violent. So it's really hard to know what to believe, and it's going to take a while before it's all understood. So I think that's going to have an impact on what happens through this pandemic and also what happens when we come out of it. And I think we're starting to see that both here in Pakistan and in my own country. So now that we know what we're faced with, I think we have to look forward to and get to the question of what the new normal will be like. I think at times like this, it's helpful to go back to the title of that great 1960s Hollywood movie. You may have heard of it, Clint Eastwood, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's no relation to this topic, but I think it's just a good way to group what the different aspects are that we're going to look at in the post-COVID world. So first, let's be positive. Let's look at the good. Frankly, we've all become much more knowledgeable on health issues. I dare say our children and those who have grown up during this period will know a lot more about diseases than we did. Hopefully, we're all going to be picking up new and better habits, such as hand washing. And this in turn can help all of us protect ourselves against other issues. I will say, even just here on the US consulate, our health unit, our doctor here used to say that we were one of the highest posts in the world of incidence of gastrointestinal diseases. And that's just because of the diseases that were being passed around. But since we've had COVID, it's very strange to say, but we've become much healthier here on the compound, and we don't have any of those diseases anymore. And it's probably because we are strenuously following the rules, washing our hands, using all sorts of disinfectant, and we're just following good practices. So that's a good thing. I think there's also a focus on taking care of yourselves that may turn out to be positive in health issues. I think, at least in my family, we've been more careful in terms of, if you have a health issue, speaking about it and maybe getting help for it. It sounds very strange, but I've been working out more. And so we are becoming healthier, even though there's been a negative impact on others. Another aspect that has been the same all around the world is, I think, been a heightened awareness and respect for all of those working in the medical profession. So the tributes to healthcare workers have been rather beautiful, I think, and we hope it will keep up. But at the very least, it has also raised the profile, and hopefully will lead to more and more of our younger generations to see healthcare as an important field to join, attracting some of the best and the brightest in our society. So hopefully this might lead to a stronger healthcare system. Focusing on healthcare as well, it's placed, I think, an important spotlight on the entire healthcare system. So I think we could probably do our own good, bad, and the ugly on healthcares in our own countries. But right here in Karachi, obviously there's been standout institutions that have received all types of praise. And there's no denying that we're seeing in full view the gaps in service that has been on display. So it's the same in my own country. And what it does is wakes us up to the challenges that we already knew were there. It's clear that COVID has already led to an increase in health funding in government budgets that were announced, for example, last week here in Sindh. And hopefully that might lead to new funding in health systems in general in the years to come. But not only in the healthcare industry, but we need better and more accessible healthcare. So interestingly enough, the pandemic has led to a huge explosion in telemedicine options. And this might be a way to address healthcare issues out in rural areas, for example. The structure of the health industry might in some ways change because of this pandemic. So home tools that could be part of everyone's household keepings. So for example, home thermometers, and I know in my own family, we have a pulse oximeter now, and we all have gotten very used to having masks. So it could become the new normal that we're all just a little bit better at taking care of ourselves. Lastly, I think it's fair to say the pandemic has definitely advantaged some people and industries more than others. I mean, I hate to say it, but imagine if you had a child who was just hired by a company called Zoom in the beginning of this year. What a lucky break that would have been, because obviously tech companies are doing very well, especially those who are moving to disrupt traditional markets. Amazon and other online ordering companies are doing booming business. Netflix and other video on demand systems, and all sorts of drive-through services. In the US, we already had common drive-through restaurants, but we also had certain drive-through pharmacies, grocery stores, and other services. I think those things are all gonna take off, and there's gonna be some advantages for those. Because of COVID, many of the businesses have accelerated their plans to move their files and others into things like cloud-based solutions. I think in many ways, and those of you who are working in business, it's something we all knew was coming and we're all working on, but there were always risks involved, no doubt. But now people have had to really accelerate their plans for that and to make those decisions. Frankly, a lot of the businesses, I think, were just dragging their feet in making those decisions because it's hard to make a big investment or a big decision. And COVID has now brought that home to a decision point. So either you do or don't, but there was no more procrastinating on that. Those decisions need to be taken. Education is another field that I think a lot of people have seen. Those of us with kids know all about the new homeschooling. I think I can hear the groans out there already from students and parents. It's obviously not something that anyone wants to make full-time because it's been really challenging. But it has forced the issue that educators have already been struggling with, and that's how to integrate technology into learning. So there are clearly good parts and bad parts. And eventually, when we all go back to school, there can be a better conversation about how to keep those good parts and to drop the bad ones. But we knew it was coming, and now it's finally here, and it got accelerated very quickly. Lastly, I think there's some things that all workplaces will deal with. This whole painful experience has really forced all of our businesses, and I think it's true whether in manufacturing or in services or retail or government like us, banking, we've all had to take a very hard and painful look at our businesses very quickly. It's forced us to consider making changes that we probably wouldn't have made before. So, I mean, we can all be honest, we could have been doing virtual meetings before. We had all of these tools, but we never really considered it because, well, our workplace was you come to work and you have meeting rooms, and so you have meetings in person. But now that we're growing comfortable doing these types of things with all sorts of meeting tools, we could actually consider doing some of them virtually when it makes sense. So I can imagine a business, for example, having a business emergency on a weekend, and instead of saying, okay, let's all go in and have a meeting in the office, you could say, let's do this virtually because we know how to do it. So you could save time and money that way. And maybe, just maybe, because our eyes have now been opened to a more flexible idea of what it means to be working or getting the work done, we could be more open to such things as more flexible hours for employees, or things like teleworking, which is what we've been doing here at the US Consulate, where employees can get work done from their homes. This can be a really important thing for those of society who have a lot of children with special needs, or for mothers and fathers who want to have a more balanced work and family life. So this pandemic might lead to something that's more helpful in getting us to reimagining a better structure for work and the environment for all. So these are all hopeful things that I think this pandemic could lead to in the future. But now, sadly, we need to move on to the bad. And I think the optimist side of me wanted to see those things as positives, but you'll see there's a flip side to each one of them. We have to be realistic about the negatives. Let's start with the easy and the obvious things. We've all lost, and we are losing, I think, a connection to others. It's great that we can have this conversation right here, but clearly it's not the same. Normally, I would be with you all standing in the same room, and I'd be able to read your facial expressions and your body language, and I would be adjusting my presentation accordingly. Now, I can't tell whether or not you're all really interested or fascinated by my words, or whether you're all sitting there sleeping. If you were all falling asleep, I would have made it much faster, and I would stop talking and move on to the questions right now, but I'm sorry. I simply have to present differently because of the world that we're in. I'm sure we all see and feel it. Having conversations with colleagues and friends, standing 2 meters apart or without a handshake or a hug, sharing the warmth and the support, it's not easy. And it's okay for a while, but eventually it's taking a toll. I spoke earlier about the possible health benefits, but it's also clear that there's going to be a lot of negative consequences as well. The fear of COVID will make people less likely to reach out for help for other diseases. Staying on lockdown makes it harder for people to exercise and probably eat as well. So it's going to make people less healthy. It's also not to mention the emotional toll that the new normal is having on people. Depression, anxiety, and other mental diseases will certainly be exacerbated. We're all feeling the stress at this time, and it will go on, and it will take its toll for a longer period of time. Even when we come out of the current lockdown phase, I think the stress and anxiety won't completely go away. And recognizing the need to adjust to a new reality, which is strange and difficult, will bring on its own new stresses. So I'm afraid that we're going to have health stresses for a long time to come. And when I spoke about the increased funding on health that may be coming in the short run, initially, that's going to be channeled into COVID areas. And that could take resources away from other important diseases. One very concrete example is the worldwide effort to eliminate polio. this is an effort that I know that Rotary International is an important partner in. We were getting so close to eliminating that disease. And as you may know, the cases of polio went down to only 22 just 3 years ago. And Pakistan is only one of 3 countries that still has active polio going on. Unfortunately, now it looks like the COVID pandemic is likely going to put the goal of eliminating polio further into the future, as it's going to be harder and harder to keep up the vaccination efforts here in Pakistan and other countries. Another small thing, but community or shared aspects in any business, and I know we have this a lot here at the U.S. Consulate, where you have shared coffee pots or you have candy baskets that people put out and people are sharing that. I think those things are going to go away. I think the sharing of phones or desks with colleagues is another workplace change that's going to happen. And I think our community will feel less community than it did before. And lastly, I think we've all gotten used to this. We've all gotten used to wearing the masks. And I suspect that some aspect of that will continue to go on, even when we have any sort of medicines or vaccine. It strikes me as it had become common in certain Asian cities. You would see on the news people walking through Hong Kong or Tokyo. And perhaps it'll be just as common in places like New York and Paris as well. Likewise, I think the other thing from Asia that we got used to seeing is a bow instead of a handshake. That's very common in Asian cultures. So as well, I have to say here in the US Consulate, we definitely prefer the common Pakistani practice of placing the hand over the heart and nodding. That's something that we've become very second nature to us, and I like to do that every day. Continuing on with the bad, our expanded reliance on technology will certainly come at a price. In addition to a less personal experience that technology gives you, there's also the question of our rights and protection of personal information. So I'm sure everyone has heard about the efforts to use our cell phones in order to, as a contact tracing tool, to alert those who may have been close to a COVID positive patient. Already, countries like Germany, Israel, and Singapore are using those phones for this purpose. And I understand that South Korea is using actual CCTV footage. So just as the pandemic is an opportunity for institutions to make quick decisions on things they might have been putting off, I think it may also cause other organizations to take steps that maybe they hadn't been open to making before. And these can lead to much wider consequences in the future. And I think this is something we'll have to keep an eye on. So I mentioned at the top of the discussion that one of the differences between pandemics of the past and of the world today is how connected we are. You can get on a plane in Karachi today and be completely on the other side of the world tomorrow. And unfortunately, I suspect it won't be that easier, that it won't continue to be that easy anymore. Not only will the worldwide airline industry likely contract after this pandemic, but I think we're definitely looking at bankruptcies in the travel industry. But for the reason, but also the reason for its contraction will likely be that the demand for travel will decrease. I think in general, suddenly, almost overnight, for many of us, the world seems like a much scarier place now. So, for example, I mean, my family and I had no plans to travel to China before this pandemic, but I think it's fair to say that I won't be able to convince my wife for us to go to China anytime soon now. And in general, we won't be looking to go very far away on vacations. I don't think it's necessarily anything specific, but I think it's just probably best to stay home right now. I know that's the conversation that we're having in my own household. And I suspect that's a conversation that many of you or many others around the world are having. I think it could be good for domestic travel destinations or regional destinations. I know in the US, they're gearing up for a lot of Americans to be doing a lot of driving vacations this summer and not going on airplanes and traveling very far away. But I think, for example, you know, I lived in Africa for many years. I think the big time exotic safari destinations will be hurting considerably for the next few years. And this will likely mean a contraction in the market and less availability for everyone who's looking to do international long haul. So I think that's something we'll have to be looking at. In addition to the market and the availability of travel options, there's likely to be a lot more complications. So as we all know, over the last few months, many governments instituted various measures for travelers. Here in Pakistan, international flights were canceled. Up until last night, I understand the government just opened up for incoming international flights. Even more, there were a lot of regulations put in place and procedures that you had to follow. I think those may continue in one form or another. Those of us who travel frequently are probably familiar with the little yellow WHO card that listed all the various immunizations we had. Well, sometimes I forgot to carry that one, but I suspect that it will become more mandatory going forward. Or there could be something else. I know that there's talk of new COVID passports that countries may require that could end up being a requirement for travel to get into certain countries. So I think for those of us who want to travel in the future, it's just not going to be as easy. And in general, I'm afraid all of this will lead to a less open world and further deepening divisions that already exist. I think especially those of us who work in world affairs, we believe that the more the two countries or two peoples know about each other, the more experiences we share and the more we come to understand, the more we can trust each other. So if we stop interacting, we may stop trusting as well. And I'm afraid this is when we start moving into the ugly part. And that's that I think we're going to have a continued distrust in globalization. And I think we're already seeing that. You're already seeing that during this pandemic, countries, even friendly countries, can start to have frayed relations. They draw, the draw to make sure that your own country is protected and taken care of can sometimes be at the expense of others. And that's going to get ugly. My own family was living in Europe during this pandemic, and I think we were not happy to see the fraying of the European Union that started at the very beginning with countries like Italy and Spain that felt like they were the most threatened, and then countries in the north that may or may not have been offering as much assistance as they could have. It started there, and I think it's going to continue. I really fear that this will especially be on display when new medicines and vaccines become available. So we've already seen in the past that pandemics, that discrimination and divisions can be exasperated. And I'm afraid to say that we're already seeing that in my own country. So going back to the question of real versus fake facts from the beginning, it's also become a lightning rod for dissent. So whether or not you wear a mask in public or whether or not you socially distance yourself can sometimes be seen as a political statement today. And I'm afraid this isn't going to go away when we have a vaccine. So the divisions in our society that have always existed will simply become even starker. If we go back to education, as technology and learning is used more and more, it will become even more clear that those who can afford it are once again going to have an advantage over those who can't. So those of us with expensive phones and computers and fast internet connections can have access to information and entertainment, while those who are poor will not. Those differences will continue to be exasperated, and it could lead to continued questioning of authority, changes in politics, and in some cases, it could end up leading to violence. To be sure, none of us really know what's going to happen. This COVID world is going to be a surprise to all of us, but we all need to be vigilant. And I hope that all of us can take it upon ourselves to try and ensure that the good possibilities that I described to make the world a better place will win out. And I guess you could say that we all have our part to try and make sure that the bad and ugly parts are fought against so that it doesn't get as bad as it could. So those are my initial thoughts at the beginning of this conversation. I hope I didn't take up too much time. Now I'd love to have a conversation and hear what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. It's, I think it's been, okay, Homa, go on.
Okay, so Jack, I love listening to you, and you're absolutely right. But the reason I joined this meeting today was that I wanted to hear something about the way global politics is shaping up. The tussle
Global
between,
politics?
Yes, the tussle between perhaps, I don't know if you can comment on it or not, the tussle between China and the United States, because it's going to impact all of us. And some people are calling it the tragedy of modern times, because this is a time when global power should be coming together to resolve the issue. All we see is a widening gulf.
Yeah, I think no, absolutely. I think what I would do is go back to, first of all, a lot of this has nothing to do with COVID, right? So I think even before the pandemic came about, the rise of China was going to be perhaps the major issue that that the whole world was going to have to address over the past decade and in the world to come. I think those of us who have been working in foreign policy for the past 20 years have seen it coming, and almost like one of those COVID graphs, it goes like this, and then it starts to have a very strong increase. And it's complicated, and you can see it in many different areas. But when I think back about the challenges that we were already facing with China, and you know my bio, I spent the last 4 years in Brussels, and I think what I've seen mostly is the challenge concerning the 5G and the question of Chinese technology companies getting involved, and how the US and different various European countries were dealing with that, and the different strategies to manage that in. That was already putting us in a difficult situation. And now with COVID, and of course with it coming out of Wuhan, China, I think it exasperated those same issues. I have to say, I don't have an answer for you. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. And you know the political situation that my country's in right now. I think the current administration has a very strong policy, and all I can do is echo the words of the president. And as we all know, the words of the president come out sometimes at unanticipated times. So those of us who work in foreign policy in the US are very careful that we don't want to say, well, our position is this, because then somebody could come back and say, the president just tweeted. All I can say is this is going to be the challenge going forward. What are we going to do? And I think the truth is that you're going to see it in so many different policies. So I already mentioned technology, which is one area. I think trade is another huge area. Because I was working in the defense and security industry, the rise of the Chinese military is another very, very scary and interesting area. I think you heard the president is now talking about new arms control agreements and saying he wants to have Russia and China and the US to do a tripartite agreement. Of course, there's the issue of nuclear weapons. So you add all of those things together, and the importance of the US and China maintaining a conversation continues to be the most important thing. I'm heartened by the fact that our Secretary of State just met with the major, I forget whether it was the foreign minister or one of the high-level foreign ministry members of China in Hawaii this week. So we're going to continue that dialogue, and we're going to continue to working on that.
Thank
Well,
you.
Thanks.
That was a very elaborate answer. However, we have a few things that I'd like. That Jack's covered what the old, epidemics and all that were like. He's also covered what kind of problems that we've had. He's also looked at the positives that we have. And then he's also looked at what the world will look like and what kind of problems would be. There would be obviously lots of bankruptcies. I mean, travel is going to be much more expensive if they have to fly 50% of the passengers. So it's going to be there. I mean, all those things are going to be there. But right now, what I would like is that we have Christina from our book club who works with UNICEF, but she was in Italy when it started. And Christina has been there for some time. She has this question that she's typed on the chat. I would like Christina to come on and ask the question herself.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Well, yes, I typed it, but I can repeat it. My issue is just about inequities. And I'm asking it because I'm in Italy. I'm actually living in Karachi, but by pure chance, I got stuck in Italy when the whole epidemic started here, and I'm still here. And somehow we are in a sort of post-COVID era, I would say, in the sense that the epidemic curve has gone down dramatically, and we have almost a normal life, except for just wearing masks and a little bit of social distancing that I don't see much respected. But definitely what I think this COVID experience has really showed us the big inequities of the who can afford and who can't afford. And I think probably in Karachi and in Pakistan is definitely felt very strongly. A lot of things were said, oh, after COVID, we will have a different economy, we will look at different things. But I don't know, I have the feeling we are not that. Probably, I don't know, is it greed? Is it that it was too short of a time for really changing? But yet that's just my feeling and my fear that we will restart business as usual, because at the end of the day, we just want economic growth. And the economic growth that we know is the economic growth of before. So with huge inequities, and we are not really able to change our mentality. Over. Thank you.
Ciao Cristina, molto piacere. Mia moglie è italiana anche. Cristina, I just wanted to mention that I completely agree with you. That is the challenge. That is the question. And without going into detail, because that's not what this talk is tonight, I think what we're seeing in my country is an attempt to make this stress that we're going through real, to make real changes that we have been just postponing on making. And some of those have to do with diversity and equality. Some of those have nothing to do with the health issues, but it has exasperated the challenges that we already knew were there. So you're probably seeing the Black Lives Matter movement has now changed things very, very quickly. Industries that have been resisting changes have now suddenly switched, and now they fully support these things. So I guess it gives me some hope, but I agree with you that it's going to be a real challenge to make real changes in our countries, because we've all known these inequalities existed, and we haven't done anything about it up until now. So it's going to be up to us to make sure that we do. Thanks.
Well, now we will first go to Naveen Sardana from New Delhi, and then we will have Mr. Samar Ali Khan, the PTI MPA and a great Rotarian, a friend of ours. First, Naveen, please go on. Naveen, are you there? Naveen, please.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you now.
Okay. Hi, Jack. My question to you is that with this pandemic, most of the countries are becoming inclusive, and a lot of countries, whether it's India, whether it's the US, are wanting to reduce their dependence on China. For example, if we take the case of APIs, which is active pharmaceutical ingredients, I was surprised when I heard India imports 70% of their active pharmaceutical ingredients from China, though we are a very major exporter of pharmaceutical products. But more than that, I was surprised that the US imports 95% of the APIs from China. Now, most of the countries are going to look inwards and develop all these products. And various, including electronics and various other products, so that they reduce their dependence on China. How relevant will WTO remain after, say, a few years down the road when all this has happened?
Well, I'm no trade expert, but I think you bring up the WTO and the stress that it's going to have on that organization as well. I think there's stress on the entire multilateral system. I mean, you've already heard about the WHO and the challenges that we have with it. And of course, that's specifically focused on China's impact on that. And I think we're going to continue to have the same questions on WTO rules. You bring up the US importation of goods from China, not only in the pharmaceutical industry, but the US and China are so closely linked in our economies that I think it is fair to say that there will be real impacts. Now, the good part is that we're dependent upon each other. So hopefully that will lead to the need to find compromises and moving forward. But I think in general, our position is always that we don't try and tell any other country that they should or shouldn't be trading with another nation, but everyone should do what they can to protect themselves, make sure that they have multiple inlets and outlets so that no one can take advantage of them and put pressure on them in times of need.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we have Samar Ali Khan. Samar, we haven't seen you for a long time, so let's have Samar Ali Khan.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so I think it's a great topic, and I'm so glad that we're all together, I think we need to look at what's the way forward now, and how do we tackle this issue? Whoever can do what they can, whether it's on the personal level, if it's on a global level, I think we need to put our heads together. I think the time is here where this competitiveness or the domination over each other has to now shift. It's the worst. It's a calamity that's heading our way. And if we are all standing there, guns drawn, it's not going to help us. I'm talking about humanity. So I think for once, I think this is like a reset where we need to figure that all humans and I quote, that the world has to be a better place. Well, listen, I'm totally with you on that one. It's a horrible place right now. I think we're just out to grab whatever we can for myself. It's not even for our people, it's for me. And that selfishness needs to go. I'd just like to, so I think the main emphasis is how do we put our heads calamity, this disaster that's heading this way. So I think we need to readjust ourselves. I think there's a lot of positives. One of the larger problems, other than the virus itself, is the mental state of everyone. I think there's mental health is an issue now also, other than the economic issues that our people face, especially the third world countries, where we are broke. Well, Pakistan is broke. We are in debt.
I'm afraid his connection broke.
The community service. So I think I just like to, I think just cut it down a little bit, where I like to say that I think look at the half full also at the same time. The half full for me, and I think I'd like to share this, is that for the first time in my 40 years of being in business and going through life, I'm spending more time with my family. We're eating together, spending quality time together. I think that's a positive. I think it's a change in me for the better. I think we need to look at that because we do forget family. And I think that's very important. The second good thing about what's happened is, I'm trying to tell you the positive. Business is finally paperless. I've been talking about it forever, that we should have a paperless office. Well, I wasn't doing it. So, and even my clients, I'm an architect, my clients would obviously demand a personal one-on-one. Well, I'm like a psychiatrist, actually. When I sit at
Sammy, your voice breaking up.
Sammy's connection is a problem.
Sammy can't hear you.
Can you hear me at all? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I'll to cut it short because I know other people need time too. But listen, so the next positive thing is my business.
Now you're gone again.
My drawings with my clients, my contractors, my suppliers, and my office is working remote. Instead of working 8 hours, they're now working 24/7 hours because they're sitting at home and working.
Yeah.
Yes, Jack. Over to you.
This is an opportunity for government of Pakistan. I think this is a opportunity for I am politically involved. So I'll say that we need to change our priorities to deliver social services to our people. We need better healthcare.
Gone. Sammy, can't hear you.
So, yeah, I don't know what to do about it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So I can't control the internet, whoever does. But listen, really quickly, I think we are trying to develop a social network based on what the Benazir Income Support Program is and was. Develop it for
Sammy, once
where they
again,
have to
it's
count on
gone.
trying to deliver. Okay, so
You're
I'm
on
so
now. You're on now. You're back.
okay. So I'm sorry. I don't know where you missed me, but I'll just carry on.
Benazir,
So I think this is an opportunity we have to develop a social network, our social services, especially our health, and also have a database to know who's below the poverty line. Right now, we've got 32% of our people below the extreme poverty line. We need to develop that further. I think I've said most of everything. Yes, what I'd only like to wrap it up with, I'd like to wrap it up with this. I think the third world countries need debt relief. Right now, Pakistan is I'll say a state of war Pakistan with India has to be resolved. I think China and America have to resolve their issues. I think otherwise we're going to kill ourselves. I don't understand this whole. I'm not talking to my Indian friends here. I'm just talking globally right now. We are spending so much on arms, and who's exporting the arms? America, China, and Russia. Now, okay, it's as bad as drugs. I mean, should we export heroin to buy those arms? They're both the same. They are as bad as each other. So if you want to do arms control, I think the whole world needs to go into an arms control issue. We have to resolve our defense issues. Our neighborly, we should be in a peaceful mode. Like you said, Jack, again, the world needs to be a better place. And it's not right now. And we're all contributing to it being a horrible place. So this is an opportunity to reset. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Okay, Jack, let's have your comments on this.
Well, I think I could just say I agree with so much of what he just said. I will say that the U.S. has supported the debt relief for Pakistan. We were with them in the United Nations, and our president and your prime minister spoke about that. So that's a good aspect. I also appreciated what you said about looking at the good things, spending more time with family. Unfortunately for me, I've been here and my family's been there. But also the opportunity to finally do what we say we wanted to do, which is to have the paperless office and move things electronically. There are good aspects to that. So that's good. And obviously, I completely agree with your comments on the need to focus on providing services to our people. As I said, it's something that I think our country is dealing with right now. And I would agree with you that it's something that your country could focus on, using this as an opportunity to do better as well. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Summer. Thanks a lot. Now we will open the floor to questions. Whoever has a question, Amina is here. Amina, maybe you have a question. Unmute.
Sorry, Summer, I'll ask the question a little later.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
So the floor is open. Whoever would like to ask the question.
I see
I have
Rajiv
my hand
Chopra.
raised. So may I go first?
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah. Please go on.
All right. Hi, Jack. This is Faisal Malik. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It was really interesting. I had posted a question in the chat box also, and you were absolutely right about the trade, because that could really steer the world in the next in a new direction altogether. But having being involved in this area, I think the new normal for trade, for the business, will also be different, totally different than what we are doing currently now. So any thoughts about how can US or a country like yours, or a major country in this area, can support the entire world and can stay the direction where we can introduce concepts like electronic trade documents or e-signatures, and more usage of the cloud services globally, because the regulators are not open to these ideas yet, even though they have started talking about it, and also the multilateral organizations globally promoting trade. I was just going through one of the press conferences of the Jim of the DG WTO, and he was also forecasting that probably because of the COVID, the world can see a decline of approximately 15 to 30% in the
Trade.
merchandise globally. So that's a big impact globally, because of the every country will be affected by it. So probably the bigger countries and the large countries in the world can take their or the leading countries can take use their weight to steer the whole world into the new normal with regards to technology and new adoption of the disruptive technologies that we have. So any views around those?
Yeah, thanks, Faisal. That's a really good point. And I think that's another great opportunity we have there. I can tell you that the US, we have always been a leader in this, and we try and use electronic processes and technology. We love computers and technology, I think more than almost any other country in the world. And we've made things much more efficient because of that. I think many of you probably know that we operate here at Port Qasim a container security initiative program, where every container that's going to the US is scanned and done electronically so that it is pre-cleared to get into the US when it gets there. And I learned recently that is all done electronically. They use fiber optic lines, and they have a live camera video feed, and they're testing all of that. We love doing those things. But you're right, it's inefficient in certain countries. And I can tell you that one of the things we're struggling with right now is we need to bring in some additional staff members here to our consulate to manage the clearing of customs documents to get our containers cleared from the port of Karachi to go to support our folks in Afghanistan. And the only way that can be done is through paper clearances. And we certainly would support, and we're doing everything we can to try and encourage countries like Pakistan and others to convert all that stuff to electronic documents, electronic signatures, electronic approvals. That's going to create so many more efficiencies in world trade. So hopefully we can use this as an opportunity to move that forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of more questions. So the floor is open. Whoever would like to ask a question, please go on.
I see Rajiv Chopra has his hand up.
Okay. Rajiv, please go on.
Thank you. Thank you, Naved. Good evening, Jack. Good evening, all our friends in Karachi. Greetings from New Delhi. Jack, I would like to hear from you about the post-COVID era. You see, I believe, and I'm sure all of us believe, that with God's grace, this will end sometime. I don't know when, but sometime. My question, Jack, is that the strain that is being faced today between countries on so many issues, are we going to be in an elastic zone and come back in the post-COVID era? or is this strain going to be a plastic zone and remain there for the rest of our lives?
Wow.
Yes, Jack.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, many of you have been on this earth longer than I have, but I can just tell you my impressions. You know, as a child growing up in America in the 1970s and 80s, I basically became knowledgeable about the world after the very disturbing and violent and difficult times in the US of the 1960s, moving into the 1970s. So obviously in the US, the 1960s with the civil rights movement, the murder and assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and then the beginning of the Vietnam era, which was so difficult for the US, through into the Watergate scandal in Washington in the early 1970s. It was a time of so much upheaval in the United States. And then for me, I was just becoming aware when Ronald Reagan was elected president. And to me, and some of our colleagues were just talking the other day, those 8 years under Ronald Reagan seemed like the calmest, most coming together time that we had. And I guess I will still say it's not a political conversation, but the image of Ronald Reagan as the president for me was, that's the president, somebody who stands there and speaks for the nation, who's there to have a shoulder to cry on when the space shuttle crashed, who's there to stand up to communism, to create this black and white, we are the good guys world. And it created a world that I think was very safe and understandable. But then after that, the world got more complicated, then the rise of terrorism and other things. And then we've moved into a much more complicated world. With the end of communism, the end of the Soviet Union, we got into what many people would describe as a multipolar world, which is much more challenging to manage. And I think during the Cold War, it was pretty easy because you're dealing with nation states, having conversations, standing up to people. You had the good guys and the bad guys. You're either with us or you're against us. And then when you get into the modern day foreign policy, the good guys are sometimes bad, the bad guys are sometimes good. And we don't know whether negotiating with the bad guys is the right thing to do or whether you should just not talk to them at all because you're sending a clear message. I think for many of us too, under the Obama administration era, especially in the US, there was a lot of progressivism that took forward. So for example, we had elected an African-American to be president of the United States. Many people never imagined we would move so far socially in their lifetime. We moved forward on things like gay marriage and other things. And it just seemed like a very progressive time. And many people were celebrating how we were ending wars. There was peace out there. We were doing the right thing. And we felt good, multilateralism again. And then we had our election in 2016, which brought out so many differences. And I think the election of the current president created divisions, which have now just been exasperated. So if you ask me, are we getting better or are we getting worse? I don't really know. I mean, I can imagine two ways. I can imagine that this election coming up in America is just going to polarize even further. And we could end up having even longer and worse polarization in our country, which of course has impacts around the world. Or it could be that we reach a point where Americans and others say, you know what, we need to stop finding differences between ourselves and start focusing on the similarities. We need to start compromising. We need to go back to moderation and finding views in between. But at this point, I have to say, just like if you wanted me to predict what's going to happen in the US election, I would say I simply don't know. But I share with you the concern and I guess the hope that the world will get to be a better place.
Thank you, Jack.
Jack,
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Dr. Wasif from Saudi Arabia. Will you comment on the traveling policy or traveling strategy from post-COVID situation, from lockdown to locked in, especially in USA?
Sorry, the what strategy or the policy?
The traveling policy.
The which policy?
Traveling strategy and traveling policy.
Traveling.
Yeah.
Travel policy. Well, we really don't have any. We do have, you want to know the restrictions on the US now?
No, I mean after the post-COVID situations.
Oh, post-COVID suggestions. I think what I meant to say is I think we just don't know what they're going to be. And I think people are going to be, they're going to be very cautious. But I think there will always be people who will say either I'm invincible and I'm not going to get infected, or, well, we still want to go see the world, so I'm going to go. And I think people will be free to do that, but it might just be a little bit harder. But I think for the most part, you're going to see a contraction of the industry simply because there'll be a lot of people out there who will be more fearful for traveling. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is worldwide, the economic impacts are going to mean that people have less money. And so I think people with less money do less traveling, do less vacations. One industry I would say that if you wanted to fear for any industry, I would say the cruise industry. Because it's really hard to say, oh, let's go back and get on cruise ships again with 4,000 people pressed together in a tiny little boat. I think that's going to be really hard for them to say we're going to be able to do that safely. And I can't even imagine what changes they could make to make it more safe. Because as I understand the industry, it's all about numbers. So if you can pack 2,000 people on a ship and make so much money, you might as well pack 4,000 people and make twice as much money. The other thing is obviously sporting events, concerts. Are people going to be going to big rock concerts anymore? Is that going to be even allowed? I'm not sure what's happening in the cricket, the PSL here in Pakistan right now, but in the US, I'll tell you, everyone's going through upheaval. Baseball season hasn't even started yet. The NFL is debating, and the president's chiming in on Twitter. The NBA appears to be coalescing around a plan where they're all going to stay at Disney World, and they're all their families and coaches and everyone's going to just be at Disney World, and then they'll play games in empty stadiums. So I think this is going to be really interesting for a while.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and that Amina Zayed has that she wants to ask a question. Amina, over to you.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Actually, culture and cultural activities, I think, reduce stress and mental illness, and they create a kind of atmosphere of inspiration and hope. So now with the museums closed and concerts cancelled, do you think cultural activities will survive online? And also, how are artists going to survive? Because financially, how will they survive?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I know. And I know at some point, and in the US, one of the things that we've had a huge debate over is religion as well. And you may be familiar with some of the court cases where some of the churches have actually gone to court to say, but you need to exempt us because people need religion in order to survive. So I would group that in the same with cultural activities. You're right. It's important for being human. It keeps you sane. It keeps you mentally stable. And I think you're entirely correct. There are some cultural institutions which probably are going to end up failing. I know that one cultural institution in the US that is always in very dangerous financial straits are, for example, symphonies and symphony orchestras, because the economics of that are so hard. I actually just read recently, the famous Apollo Theater in New York City. They had done so much work to finally come out, and I think the director of that theater was saying that for the first time this year, they were hoping to break even or actually run a surplus. They haven't done that in decades, but of course, because of COVID, they're all closed down. Will they survive anymore? We don't really know. But that's going to be a real challenge, and what that's going to mean for everyone. I mean, I certainly hope that they will survive, but I think like with most things, the strongest institutions will survive, and it may actually be an advantage for them. When you get into artists and how they're going to be paid, I think the music industry, interestingly enough, had already had this adjustment, because the structure of the music industry was overtaken by the rise of downloaded music. And so the rights and the royalties had already been adjusted and changed because of that. And now I think they are probably even better prepared than most other industries for this, because there are already musicians who are able to release their music onto the online platforms already and get paid sufficiently. And of course, that's another one. The online entertainment industry has taken off. And so they're earning a lot of money that way. So hopefully at least the musicians will survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. It's been a great evening with you. And let me tell you, the number of participants normally in such meetings where there's no selfie opportunities or lunches and so on, all that is pretty low. Today, at no time we've had less than 50. We've had more at times, but then, so many things happening. People had to go to other meetings and other, but at no time we had less than 50 people. And you really took up the subject, and the question answer session I thought was very powerful. That brought out so many more things. I've just finished writing an article on this thing, which is called Rising in the Challenging Times. I'll share with anyone who would like to have it. So things are going to be different. My thing is that what of doing work is not going to change very much. It is how of doing the work that's going to change in the post-COVID era. Because whatever we're doing, we have to do. But how we do it is going to be very different. And you put it, from the beginning till the end, you put it so beautifully. We can only thank you for it. There have been so many of these compliments that have been coming to you in the chat. People saying the great thing and, compliments on all that. And I hope we'll continue with this till as long as this thing goes on. Our next meeting is on the 11th of July. It's with the Canadian High Commissioner. She will be speaking to us on subject is not yet decided, but Wendy Gilmore is a brilliant speaker. I've heard it a few times. So we look forward to all of you joining us. I'll send personal invitations to all of you as I have most of your emails and contacts. And thank you once again. And thank everyone for joining it.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you,
Very well
Naveed.
done.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveed. Thank you, Xavier.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you, Jack.